Stop messing around, stop fooling around, stop delaying, stop procrastinating. Get up, get out, get it done. Everything is possible, nothing is a problem, and anything can be overcome. I just get my ass up out of bed, I get my shit together, and I get out and I start the fight. And that will transform you from a mere mortal into a superhuman being. I've never, ever, ever met anybody who told me that they got rich watching their IRA or their 401k.
Welcome to the Daily Cash Flow. My name is George Robson.
Welcome, I'm Peter Siegel. Nice to see you, George.
Nice to see you, Peter. Yeah. How's your day going so far?
Day's going well. Psyched for Thanksgiving, psyched to chill this week, but a lot going on this week news-wise. We had Dow 30,000 today.
Right, yeah.
That was a big moment for those that are in the Dow and follow the stock markets and think it's an indication of maybe a new Biden administration coming in, and they're feeling confident about stimulus, they're feeling confident about
vaccine
prospect for 2021, the vaccine, pandemic subsiding. So seems to be a lot of confidence in the markets, at least the investor markets. Something else that I noticed is that there's a wave, a surge of new banking applications for banking licenses that are happening right now.
Why do you think that is?
Well, I think that people in the banking industry are determining that it's a good time to expand banking business or get into banking business. And so everyone's submitting federal applications for licenses. Also, I think there's $4 trillion that is floating around out there in the system that wasn't there 8-9 months ago, with more coming. So, consumers and businesses, as funny as this sounds, are flush with money, despite everything that's going on. There's $4 trillion and more coming that's floating around out there, and businesses and people need banking products. They need loans. They're buying cars. They're refinancing their homes. Banks want to participate in all of that consumer lending activity. So they want to get in on it. At the very least, the people are renovating their homes. They're starting businesses. The banks fulfill a very important need for credit and liquidity, and there's a lot of liquidity going on right now.
Yeah, that seems to be a trend during COVID of kind of that counterintuitive surge during what is seen as a constraint.
It is counterintuitive, and it's so clear that there's so many people in so many parts of the country and in so many industries and jobs and businesses and careers that are suffering so hard. But you've got $4 trillion plus in liquidity floating around in the pipes. You've got new banks that are filling out new applications. They can't get the applications in fast enough because they want a piece of all of that consumer credit and consumer borrowing activity. You've got many businesses that have never done better in their history.
Yeah.
Dow 30,000 today, but we'll wait and see what happens in 2021. I think the smoke's going to clear. The vaccine's coming out. The new Biden administration. Janet Yellen is going to be head of the Fed.
It was just declared yesterday.
I think there's going to be some certainty and clarity that comes into the picture with her there now. And I think stimulus is going to have a higher likelihood of getting deployed sooner and in larger amounts. We can only hope. For those that need it, we can only hope.
Yeah, and whenever there's a shift, opportunity arises out of whatever
Always.
shift it is. Yeah.
George, have we talked about this? Do you know what the Chinese symbol for crisis is?
I don't.
It's two symbols. One is danger and the other is opportunity.
Wow.
Did you know that?
I didn't know that.
I recently learned that, and I feel very proud that I remembered that in a coherent enough way to now talk to you about it on camera.
I feel like we need to make T-shirts. Have that. Yeah.
Crisis, danger, and opportunity. Two sides of that coin.
Yeah. So keep it in mind, people.
Yeah.
I wanted to talk about TikTok a little bit.
I was hoping you would bring that up.
Yeah. Did you see that post the other day?
It's been igniting fires under a lot of people's asses on TikTok. And thank you, by the way. I love engaging with people on all the platforms. But TikTok, I was really psyched to get some engagement with, and it seems that we hit a nerve with a bunch of people.
Yeah. And so for our listeners, we had a post about the relationship between landlords and tenants right now, and the situation of lowering lease conditions and all that kind of stuff, and that ended up sparking this conversation.
Here's the issue: how do you negotiate a lease? You've got a lease contract already with your commercial landlord if you have an office space or a storefront. I'm not talking about residential apartments here. I'm talking about commercial spaces. You've got a lease contract. The pandemic hits. you're out of business or your business is way, way off, right? And what do? Do you ask for rent concession? Do you ask for a break? Do you get it right away? Does the landlord sort of drag you through the mud for a few months and then come back and say, all right, let's talk? How does this all work? So we posted two discussions about what we're seeing in the marketplace. And when I say the marketplace, I want to be clear. I'm talking about established markets, Northeast Corridor, New York City Metro, San Francisco Metro, Chicago. The major MSAs, I think, are the first areas that we really mean when we speak of active marketplaces. Yeah. If you're in the swamps of Mississippi, again, apologies to Mississippi. If you're in the swamps of Mississippi and a pandemic hits and you've got a business there, I think it's going to be tough to go anywhere with business or get anywhere with a landlord. And I wouldn't own property in far and away places like that. But in the major MSAs where there's lots of business activity, lots of employment base, lots of economic base, that's really what we're talking about. What do, right? What you heard me say is that the landlord, this is from the landlord's perspective, they are not going to cancel the old lease and issue the tenant a new lease at a new contract rent lower than what the previous lease was. They're not going to do it. Now, I'm just telling you, they're not going to do it. Don't get mad at me. I'm just delivering this to you. It's a fact. They're not going to reduce the contract rate 99.9% of the time in these major market areas if you're going to remain in occupancy of the space. If you're a dead in the water business and you're going out. The landlord's going to take the space back and they'll have to deal with that outgoing tenant in a post-occupancy manner. Either take them to court when things pick up, or if there's a personal guarantee on the lease, or you know how leases are secured. So there's going to be some sort of collection effort or release that occurs. If there's in fact a release that occurs, maybe the outgoing tenant says, look, just keep my security deposit, here are the keys, I got to go. And maybe that's good. God bless, that works. That's what working it out means. You got to work it out. It's got to work for everybody. But the outgoing tenant can't say, you got a personal guarantee, and I'm walking, go screw yourself, I'm out of here. I mean, the landlord's going to say, hey man, you got a guarantee, I'm sorry, business is tough, but we got to work this out. If there's no effort to work it out and the tenant just takes off, I think that tenant can expect some sort of post-occupancy collections effort made by the landlord. Now, if the business is staying in occupancy of the space and their business is off, there's a discussion.
Right.
And I think that reasonable people have been attempting to work out reasonable workouts for the tenant to remain in occupancy of the space.
And it's important to make the distinction that it's not an arbitrary number that these,
Listen, I'm going to give you a numerical example. You're 100% right, but here's the deal. Let's say you're in New York City and you have a commercial storefront. You're paying $10,000 per month in rent per your lease agreement that you had in place before COVID hit. $10,000 a month in rent. COVID really started impacting businesses in March of 2020. Right? Let's say that the pandemic lasts, I'm going to pick a number here just for an example, 15 months. So March of 2020, and we start to see light at the end of the tunnel by like June of 2021. So that would be 15 months. 15 months times $10,000 a month, you have a contract that obligates you to pay $10,000 a month at 15, $150,000. So now COVID hits, revenues are down, business is way off, shutdowns, lockdowns, government regulations. You can't leave, you can't open up, all that shit, right?
Yeah.
So what do? Do you say to your landlord, hey man, you gotta give me a new lease, forget the old lease, I need a new lease at $5,000 a month. Landlord is 99 out of 100 times gonna say, sorry, let's find another way. And I bet you what the landlord's gonna do is say, hey, how about this? Why don't I give you a temporary credit of $5,000 a month? Again, hypothetical example here. You were paying 10, why don't you now pay 5? And I'll give you a temporary credit to be paid back at a later time. Let's talk about how that looks. And we'll reassess every 3 months. You'll show me your sales receipts. We'll talk about what the business environment is. I'll try and help you with signage, and I'll take the scaffolding down outside, and I'll open up whatever the regulations allow me to do. There was a few months where I couldn't do anything as a landlord to help my tenants. Just the building had to be shut down. I get it. But let's say there's things that I can do. I'm going to engage with my tenant. I'm going to do those things. And I'm going to offer, in this case, my tenant to pay $5,000 versus $10,000 a month. And The $5,000 difference doesn't go away. We have to deal with that somehow. Maybe the tenant says, okay, great. Thanks for the $5,000 reduction. I'm now paying $5,000 instead of $10,000. Maybe the tenant says, come on, man, I can't pay $10,000. I can hardly pay $5,000, and who knows how long and if I can pay $5,000. So why am I you got to give it to me for $2,000 or $3,000 a month. The landlord's not going to do it. And here's why. The second the building owner signs a written agreement, a new lease at a rent less than what the previous lease agreement was, they've devalued their building, not by $5,000 a month. In this example, we're going from 10 to 5, not by that, but by a lot more. Let's talk about how much more. So if the tenant leaves the space, I've got a vacant space, I'm out $10,000 a month or $5,000 a month, I can self-fund that if I'm a professional owner and operator of commercial buildings in these major markets. If I'm a single asset or double asset ma-and-pa owner and I've got like a storefront with an apartment upstairs or just a storefront and it's a small building and I'm a small owner of property, I'm going to take the reduced rent. I'm going to work it out with my tenant. I'll give them a new lease. I'll give them car washes. I'll give them Air Jordans, whatever I got to give them, because it's really going to impact me. But we're talking, George, about major market commercial buildings. So these are buildings where there's tons of value and the people that own them have a lot of net worth. We're talking about hedge funds, private equity funds, REITs. These are the types of buildings we're talking about in the major MSAs. They are not going to sign a new lease at a lower amount. They're going to self-fund a vacancy. 15 months at $10,000 a month, they're going to self-fund $150,000. No problem. Why won't they reduce rent from 10 to 5? Because that $75,000 loss now impacts the value of their building $1.5 million. $75,000 using a typical market commercial cap rate of 5% is a $1.5 million loss that they are now signing on the dotted line and memorializing and affirming and confirming that the value is no longer $10,000 a month, it's $5,000 a month. Now, if you think that in these major MSAs, business conditions are not going to improve in 15 months, if you think in the major MSAs that economic conditions and the economic situations for tenants and the demand for commercial space is not going to increase at the end of the pandemic, let's say in 15 months, then by all means, sign a new lease. If you're a single asset or a double asset, small mom and pop owner operator of a building, by all means, sign a new lease. You got to do what you got to do. But in the major MSAs, these major property owners and these major landlords are not going to devalue their space. They can't. Why? Because they have a contract with their bank. The bank has a commercial mortgage on the building. It may be 30, 40, 50% LTV. It may be 75% LTV. Whatever the amount of the mortgage is, it's irrelevant. Standard language in all of the commercial mortgage documents is that the property owner can't take any action that will devalue the property. The world out there can chime in and argue and say, well, hey, isn't $5,000 better than $10,000? If half the city goes vacant, doesn't the market price go down? Well, let me tell you what happens in major MSAs. The people that own these buildings, as we've already established, are often these high net worth property owners. They are going to self-fund the vacancies and kick the can till, in our example, June of 2021, when the pandemic potentially subsides and when they foresee and expect business conditions and market conditions to return back to some sort of level above what it is now. And there's going to be more demand for commercial space at that time. So if you have a high level of expectation that business conditions are going to be better sooner rather than later, of course, you're going to self-fund the vacancy loss. You're out 100, 150 grand, whatever you're out, but you're not out the $1.5 million. The $1.5 million, although it's on paper, is an important thing to watch if you're a commercial property owner, because it puts you in covenant default with your bank and it gives your bank all sorts of reason to be a major pain in your ass. So these major property owners aren't going to sign contractually for lower rents. They're going to give it to you in forms of concessions, free rent, common area maintenance charges waivers, tax contribution waivers, like whatever is in your lease as a commercial tenant. You're going to see that stuff before you see reductions in contract rate if you're in a major MSA and if your landlord's a major property owner. So we'll help out, we'll do our part, we'll give some concessions, we'll give some free rent, we'll slice and dice and skin the cat however we decide with you together in harmony between tenant and landlord. We'll work it out. That's what a workout is. Working it out means it works for both people.
Right.
There's a lot of people out there that wrote in on TikTok that said, well, but then the space becomes vacant, and then you go to get it appraised, and the appraiser says, what are you getting for it? And the answer is, well, I'm not getting anything for it. It's vacant. That's all well and good, but if the market's expecting a turnaround, and if the market is still valuing space at or near pre-pandemic levels, or expects it to return to at or near pre-pandemic levels, they're not going to put a zero value on vacant space. Vacant space still has value. It's less than if it's occupied, yes, and it's certainly less when the tenant who's in that space is paying $5,000 versus the $10,000. Right. So landlords are going to want to take whatever actions they can to keep a tenant in place, give them a lifeline, but they're not going to want to devalue their building. Well,
and that's another important distinction to make too, is that it's not all dollars and cents. It's not just about the money. These customers are ongoing customers. They're people that you have a relationship with. Yeah. And so these workouts are not just ways to save a business. It's a way to continue that relationship, continue business in the future.
It is. It's so funny. I really felt like the TikTok community was chiming in sort of from a bit of a combative place where it's like, well, you know, how can you be so insensitive to suggest that landlords shouldn't reduce the contract rate? I'm not saying landlords shouldn't do workouts with people. They should. I do. The community of landlords and property owners that I know is doing workouts wherever possible. But it's a workout. It's not a gift. Yeah. And there's a difference, right? A workout is where it works for everybody. And as the tenant who's obligated in a contract to pay money, you know, I would think that, and what I'm seeing is that these tenants are really happy to get whatever they can if they want to stay in business. If they're not going to stay in business and they're outgoing, then they're outgoing. There's nothing you can do. And again, there's going to be some post-occupancy collections effort. So sure, collection rates matter. Here you have a commercial space that was getting $10,000 a month pre-pandemic and perhaps now is getting less. So the bank's going to say, Peter, what have your collection rates been? We want to know what you're doing to keep the building alive, to pay your bills. Well, here's what I'm doing, Mr. and Mrs. Lender. I'm giving some temporary relief credits to my commercial tenant from $10,000 to $5,000, and I'm self-funding the vacancy through the end of the pandemic. I sort of think the end of the pandemic is going to happen Q1 or Q2 or 2021, but we're paying our mortgage, we're paying our taxes, and sure, there isn't cash flow left over for me and the investors, but we're keeping it alive. Isn't that great? And the lender's going to say, yeah, that's great. I'll tell you what the lender's not going to feel is so great is if I tell them that I signed a new lease contract without their consent. That's the other thing. I typically need the lender's consent to adjust the amount of revenue. But they're not going to love if I tell them that I signed a new lease contract at the $5,000 rate versus the previous $10,000 rate. They're going to say, Peter, you shouldn't have done that. You can't do that. We have a loan agreement with you, prevents you from doing that. Peter, you have a problem with us now. So as the property owner, I'm really mindful of doing what I can to help my tenant, to keep the tenant in place. It helps me too, of course, but I want to keep the tenant in place if they want to remain in place, but I have to be mindful of what my loan contracts say with my lenders. Now, if I don't have a mortgage on the building, fine.
Right. And really what we're talking about is understanding the context of what's happening in the market, what's going to happen anyway. This isn't, as you said, this isn't you just deciding.
Yeah. Well, people are writing in, they say, hey, I've reduced all of my tenants and it worked out fine. And to them I say, how many buildings do you have? How many tenants do you have? Do you have mortgages on the properties? Did you have to get consent from your lender? And do you have any deal with them post-pandemic to reevaluate and reestablish the previous rent once the pandemic ends? Like all of those things, I bet there's a lot of that's going on, but people like to write in and say, oh, you know, I reduce my rent with my commercial tenants. How about you, Peter? Well, I do when I can, but instead of a rent reduction, I'm doing rent credits or I'm doing other types of credits and concessions. Yeah. And I think if you look and if you really talk to the big property owners in the major MSAs, I think you're going to find a lot of the same thing.
Yeah. Well, this will be a good thing to, when we, hopefully move past this and go into 2021 to look back and, see where we're at.
Yeah. And government shutdowns have a lot to do with it too. You have you have March, April, May, and a lot of June in 2020 where in most areas of the country, we were shut down. Businesses weren't allowed to open. Buildings weren't allowed to open. So short of government regulations and government-imposed restrictions and requirements, people should be in business, and there's business to be done. Again, I feel really horrible for our friends in the bar and restaurant industries.
Yeah.
They're really, really having a tough time, and I recognize that a lot of this discussion perhaps doesn't apply to them. They're just getting screwed every way they turn their head every day, and it's tough for them.
Well, and that goes back to context. We're really just discussing a specific context and what it matters to.
Yeah, one person wrote in, hey, what if your tenant gets government stimulus? Should you then go and collect it? Look, I mean, these businesses need whatever stimulus they can get, not just to pay rent. Rent's a very small portion of the things that they have to pay. I recognize there's payroll. That's the main and primary thing. That's what the PPP loans were for. There's other operating expenses. So, the stimulus that was put out into the marketplace this year doesn't then make a commercial tenant all of a sudden more or over obligated to pay commercial rent obligations, but it does allow them to kick the can in their own fashion, just like commercial landlords will kick the can. We're all kicking the can. Yeah. Let's continue to kick it smartly and together. We're all in this together. And a workout is a workout. It's not a punch out. It's not a knockout. It's a workout. So work it out and work it out smartly. Just don't expect your commercial landlord to reduce the contract rent. Most of the time, it's not going to happen.
Yeah, that makes sense. All right. Well, hopefully we'll, do another follow-up and have more conversations like this.
Yeah, and I thank you for all the TikTok community out there that's been jumping in on this. I'm so psyched.
Yeah. Any traditions that you have to augment this year for Thanksgiving? I know that it's coming up.
No, we're just going to be by ourselves, like everybody, and very thankful that we're able to even just be by ourselves. I mean, it's a good day when I can just be with my family, my immediate family, wife and kids.
Yeah.
And so it's just going to be quiet. It's going to be us, and I think it's going to be like that for a lot of you guys out there. So enjoy it. Not such a big deal. It sucks, but not such a big deal. If this is what we have to do to get through this, we'll get through it. Yeah. And then sometime soon it'll be back, and we'll all hug and celebrate holidays together. Yeah. And we won't be having these kinds of discussions and Q&A, George.
Yeah. No, I'm doing the same thing with my family, keeping it small. We're jumping in the ocean every year, so we'll still be.
Do you do that?
But yeah.
Do you do it New Year's Day too?
I've done it New Year's Day, but we're not doing it every year.
Not such a big deal on Thanksgiving, but New Year's, I would say, good on you.
Yeah. Well, I've done that before. It's cold. Yeah. Well, thanks so much, Peter. I appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah. Happy Thanksgiving.
Thanks, George.
If you like what you just heard, you can subscribe to The Daily Cash Flow on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. And we'd love it if you left us a review. You can follow us on Twitter and Facebook at SiegelCap and on Instagram at Siegel.cap. As always, if you're an accredited investor, go to SiegelCapital.com and take our survey to see if you qualify to take part in one of our apartment building deals. That's SIEGEL Capital.com.